All right, everybody, welcome. Welcome to your Run Book Show on this, oops, I think there's going to be an echo. Got rid of that. I'm in Israel, so I have to shift. I've been talking Hebrew to my friends here, and it is a mental shift, and I have to shift back into English. That was not easy. I almost said this is your Run Book Show in Hebrew. That would have been funny. I don't know if anybody's listening in the United States because I know it's 7 a.m. East Coast time, and what is it? That means it's 4 a.m. Pacific time. So if anybody's in California, give me a shout out. We've got Libby. Libby is listening. She says, welcome, Yaron. So Libby is here. So I've got a bunch of Israelis probably listening right now, maybe some Europeans. We'll see if we get anybody in the chat admitting to where they are. But yes, I am in Israel. And I've got two guests here that are listening live in our three, actually, if we include Boaz. We got three people listening live here. So I gave them the option of choosing the topic. I gave them the option of choosing the topic today since they're here live, and I figured I could save them $1,000, and they could choose a topic and not have to actually pay for it. So the two things we want to talk about today are the COVID authoritarians, and we're going to talk a little bit about paleo. Paleo is a diet. Paleo is a lifestyle, and I've got some stuff to say about that and a few views about it. So let me tell you. To kind of ease us into this topic of COVID authoritarianism, let me tell you about arriving in Israel, because I think I told you about my challenges. Some of you heard my challenges about coming to Israel and whether they would let me in and all the stuff I had to do in order to get in. So now I'm on the other side of that. I've been released from basically house arrest. I've been allowed to leave and actually engage in living by the COVID authorities. In Israel. So to come to Israel in this COVID world, I had to take a PCR test 3 days before I left the United States. I was told that the airline would check that I had my PCR tests all done, and they wouldn't let me on the plane unless I had the PCR test. So when I was in South Dakota last week for Freedom Fest, I had to find a lab that would do a PCR test and would give me the results quickly. I found a lab, paid $200 to get it done, and got my PCR test, and arrived at the airport. I had all my forms ready, and in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and they checked me in as if I was flying to New York City. Nobody cared one iota about my stupid PCR test. But the plane stopped in Madrid. And in Madrid, they asked for my PCR test. And now everything starts in Madrid. So I wasn't coming from the US, I was coming from Spain. And here's the complexity. If you come from the United States into Israel, there's a chance you could get out of house arrest. But from Madrid, Spain is like considered one of those evil countries that is colored red, right? So it's not clear you can get out of house arrest. So now I have to worry about, do they know I'm not coming from Spain? I'm coming from the U.S. And then there was a twist I didn't realize. So I arrive in the Israeli airport. They let us off in this weird area in the Israeli airport that I've never been to. I think it's domestic arrivals, even though we were coming in from Spain. And they take us in, and there's immediately ropes and everything, and somebody's standing. Okay. And luckily I got off the plane first. I ran out of the bus and I got out of there, and I don't have any baggage to claim. So I was the first one in, because there was a long, long line behind me that probably spent a couple of hours at the airport. So I got to sit down in front of this kid who says, okay, where are you coming from? What is this? What is that? And I said, San Juan, Puerto Rico. And he had no clue where that was. It's for him, that was Central America, and he could just see the people dying of COVID in the streets. So immediately that was a red flag, and it's I don't know, we can't release you. You're going to have to go into isolation for 14 days. Let me call, you have to call the health department, the health ministry to get permission to leave. Here's the phone number. You call these people, and then I had to do a COVID test at the airport. Anyway, I did a COVID test at the airport. I got the result the next morning. I think I've done about 30 COVID tests so far, because over the last year and a half, all of them have been negative. My wife had COVID, so I lived with somebody who had COVID for 10 days, no separation, no nothing. I never got COVID. So I'm immune. I'm convinced I'm immune to COVID, independent of everything else. And I've already been vaccinated, but none of that matters because I don't make decisions about these. It doesn't matter my opinion about these things. The only thing that matters is what the state thinks of them. Anyway, I did another COVID test. I was negative, but that wasn't enough. So I had to isolate in my sister's apartment. In order to isolate my sister's apartment, the government wanted to know how many rooms she had, what her address was, and some people who isolate in these places, actually the police come and check. They knock on the door. Where's the isolated person? What room are they using? Can you give them food without interacting, I guess? God, talk about police states. Anyway, then, so to get out of isolation, I then had to do an antibody test. So I got up really early in the morning and went to a hospital. There were only like 20 or 25 labs in Israel that the government has authorized for these antibody tests. A pretty simple blood test that should be able to be done anywhere. So I had to go stand in line, get the test. A few hours later, it was negative, so I got the negative test. Then you have to file a form with the Israeli Ministry of Health to ask permission to leave isolation. And then you sit and wait for a couple of hours, and then I got the permission to leave isolation because I basically checked all the marks that they wanted me. So here I am doing the show from WeWorks in Tel Aviv, and the worldwide headquarters of the Iron Man Center Israel, which has an office here at the WeWorks, and who's run by Boaz Arad. So I can do this because the Israeli state has decided that it's okay for me to leave. But now I have this other problem. The problem now is that I'm planning to go to London, right? So I've got a flight to London on British Airways on Wednesday. But the state authorities in Israel have decided that it is illegal for Israelis, or not illegal, but ill-advised for Israelis to go to London. So they're banning basically Israelis from leaving Israel to go to the UK. Now I could leave on my American passport, but this is the problem. It's not clear I can get into London, right? And it's not clear there are going to be any flights because it could be the British Air cancels all the flights because the Israeli government won't allow Israelis to travel. All right, so there's uncertainty about my flight. Then there's a question of can I get into the UK? Now this is the situation in the UK, and I know this is the kind of mind-boggling BS that I said mind-boggling BS and my light fell down. I don't know, so something, this thing that's supposed to stick to your laptop doesn't work. You have to leave. Yeah. Jonathan has to leave. He's actually got to work for a living. This is kind of the mind-boggling bullshit that you have to live with. So, can I get into the UK, right? So the UK has 3 different lists of countries: red countries, amber countries, and green countries. If you're green, if you come from a green country, you can go in to the UK. But in order to go in, you have to have been in the green country for 10 days. Israel right now is a green country. So I could go into England if I spend 10 days in Israel, but I'm only spending 8 days in Israel. So there's a good likelihood that I arrive in England and they say you have to go into 2 weeks isolation because you only were 8 days in Israel. Because before Israel, I was in the United States, and the United States is an amber country. And amber, you have to isolate for 14 days. You might be able to get out after 5. But I'm only going to London for 4 days. So I can't isolate for 5. But the British government is now saying maybe, they're not sure yet, they'll turn the US into green. But they're also saying maybe they're going to turn Israel into amber. So like the worst thing that can happen to me is now they'll flip them. They'll turn the U.S. into green and Israel into amber. And then what will I do? Then I can't go to the U.K. Like in that case, there's no way because I'm coming from an amber country, not from a green country. If they keep both the U.S. and Israel on green, if they turn the U.S. green and they keep Israel in green, then I can go next Wednesday to the U.K. If they keep America amber and they keep Israel green, I have to stay in Israel an extra 2 days, and then I can go to the UK. If they make Israel amber, I can't go to the UK, period. So here I am a week before international travel, and I have no idea what's going to happen. I don't know. I've got hotel reservations, I've got flight reservations, I've got plans. There's a big event that is being organized for me in the UK next Saturday. I have no idea if I can be there or not. So, Michael says statists are so incompetent they never check anything. No, I mean, that's just not true. This is the thing. The state is very good at using force. So when it comes to violating your rights, the state is very effective at it. So no, they check. They check my tests. In some cases, they send police to your home. They do this stuff. Don't underestimate the power of the state to oppress you and destroy your life. That's why when I'm in business, I follow the regulations because the consequence of not following them are too horrific, and because the state does monitor these things. Try not paying your taxes and see if the state doesn't check. State checks, and you'll end up in jail if you don't pay your taxes. So be careful of underestimating the state. Anyway, the uncertainty that this creates, the inability to plan your life. I mean, basically, I've been trying to get to Israel for, I don't know, like 12 months, about a year. So since last summer, because my father fell ill about a year ago, and I was going to come because I didn't think he'd survive last year. So I was trying to come to Israel for about a year, and it's been, unless I was willing to be in isolation for 14 days, there was just no way to come. So it's just been this state of inability to plan. I mean, think of what a restaurant owner must have gone through over the last year and a half. Like, open, so you open, suddenly you're closed, shut down completely. Then you're open, but only 20% and maybe outside. Then you're open with masks or no masks, and then 30% outside, 30% inside. This, every 3 weeks, they change the rules. They go back, they go forward. I mean, it's insanity. You can't plan, you can't think. It's debilitating. It's destructive. It's depressing. It's depressing to the human spirit. It's the worst thing about this COVID is the uncertainty created by the authorities. In that sense, I'm not supporting this, right? So don't take this as support. The Chinese were better at this than the Europeans and the Americans and the Israelis. They did a absolute 100% shutdown. They wouldn't let anybody out of their homes unless you had a permit, and they got rid of the COVID, right? At Wuhan, they shut them down, I don't know, for a month or 5 weeks or whatever it was, and they were over with. In America, we're shutting you down, we're not shutting you down, we're closing you this, we're closing you there, we're not doing this, we're doing that. You can wear masks here, you can't wear masks there. Every 2 weeks, we're going to change the rules. Now, the solution, of course, as I've been arguing from the beginning, was test, trace, isolate. Do your job, right? Be competent. Or leave us alone. It's better. Leave us alone. Yes, more people would have died if you'd left alone, but at least we'd be free. This situation where a lot of people died, in America at least, a lot of people died, and we lost our freedom, and the uncertainty and the craziness is the worst of all worlds. And we're not even talking about the people who might have died of cancer that went undiagnosed and all kind of other problems. The one thing I did read is that, what did I do? The one thing I did read that was interesting is that suicide rates, everybody expected suicide rates to go up during COVID. Suicide rates actually went down significantly in pretty much every country in the world. Suicide in 2020 was lower than average, lower than a usual year. even though depression went up. And probably the reason is that when people live together, they're unlikely, and when they're with one another, they're unlikely to commit suicide. People feel bad about the effect their suicide will have on other people. Kind of in a funny, second-handed way, people won't commit suicide if they're close to other people. And COVID brought people into the same households in a variety of different scenarios. But nobody knows exactly why the suicide rate is down, but it is. Anyway, the scariest thing about COVID, in my view, is not the disease, which is scary enough, right? I'm not one to minimize the effect of COVID. Certainly, if you've got comorbidities, certainly if you're over the age of 65, this is a nasty, nasty disease that gets you really, really sick and in some cases will kill you. But much worse, I think, than COVID is the response of government, the authoritarianism that is being exposed in the response of government, and then the fact that that Americans and Israelis and Europeans don't seem to care about this authoritarianism. That they have responded with a shrug. They just accepted the role of government as, in a sense, government having no limits. Government can do whatever they want. I mean, who could have imagined that you could lock down Americans and tell them they can't leave their homes for an indefinite period of time? And yet that's what happened, with no demonstrations or very few demonstrations. You know, the one thing now that's getting the Europeans out in the streets is digital passports. So France has just announced that in order to get into a restaurant, you're going to need to show that you've been vaccinated, which is insane. I mean, let's say you're not vaccinated. Well, you're taking on risk. You've chosen to take on a particular risk. Why is it anybody's business? Now, if you can't take a vaccine, let's say you can't take a vaccine because, I don't know, you're sensitive or you've got health issues or you've got cancer or whatever. So you can't take the vaccine, so you're not vaccinated. Then stay home. Don't go to restaurants because there's a risk. And if you do go to restaurants, you're taking on a risk. But instead of saying to people, tough, right? It's sad that you can't be vaccinated, but live with it, adjust your life. The much easier solution is to make everybody who was vaccinated sacrifice to those who haven't vaccinated. But this has been the case, of course, since the beginning of COVID. I mean, what I suggested early on with COVID is isolate old people. You know, I think the term was cocoon old people. Protect old people, separate them from everybody else, and let the rest of us live. But that's not acceptable because that's treating people differently. We need to sacrifice. So young people, even though the chances of you dying from COVID is very close to zero, the chance of you getting very ill from COVID is very close to zero. It's not zero, but it's very close to zero. No. You have to be treated just like old people. We're going to isolate you just like everybody else. You can't go to the beach. You can't party. You can't do anything because you're expected to sacrifice for the old. It's just unbelievable how people just accepted this. How young people accepted it. Where's the rebellion of youth? Where's the independence of youth? Where's the idealism of youth? I mean, if anything, young people during COVID, particularly in the United States, were more militant about isolation and about masks and than anybody else. And yet, they were the ones that are least susceptible to COVID. For them, COVID truly was a bad flu. It was. But that's altruism. That's the impact of altruism. The impact of altruism is that we just shrug when we're asked to sacrifice, or we just sacrifice when we're asked to sacrifice. We don't question, we don't doubt, we don't challenge, we don't rise up and object. Remember, altruism is giving up your values for the sake of others. Or really, it's not even for the sake of others. Altruism ultimately boils down to one principle. Sacrifice. Sacrifice your values. For the sake of what? It doesn't matter. The fact that nobody actually benefits from your sacrifice? Because in the case of COVID, who benefited from the fact that young people were locked up? Exactly nobody, except the politicians who got to enjoy the fact that they had so much power. All right, let me remind everybody, you can ask questions. The Super Chat is open. Thank you, Brian, for your contribution. Thank you, Michael. The Super Chat is open. Not only that, but I think I saw Ali here. Was Ali here? Maybe not. Yeah, no, Ali is here. Wow, how did Ali get here? That's amazing. So Ali's here. Ali usually has a goal of raising $400 during one of these shows. I don't know if that counts at 7 in the morning East Coast time. I don't know what time it is where Ali is. It might even be 6 a.m. where Ali is. But the goal is still the goal. You know, we still have to fund this program. We still have to fund the Iran Book Show. So questions, I'll take questions at $20. I know we've probably got a bunch of Europeans listening, but hey, you guys, some of you are in Switzerland. You must have money if you're in Switzerland. You can definitely afford to support the show. But anyway, Action Jackson said he woke Ali up so she could be on the show. It's 7 a.m. in, Ali is in Venezuela, so it's 7 a.m. in Venezuela. So, cool. So yes, COVID has brought out the authoritarian tendencies among our rulers, among our politicians, and the authoritarian tendencies among our populations. That is the willingness of citizens to be guided by authorities and to stay quiet and do what they're told. I mean, it really is stunning. It really is stunning. Just the fact that people are just willing to accept and not willing to challenge. The doctors say something, even though the doctors don't agree, but the doctors say something, we interpret that immediately into a commandment. This is what we shall do. There's no thinking going on. There's no risk assessment. What is my risk as an individual? What should I do as an individual? And nobody expects us to do that. We're just expected to follow orders, just expected to do what we are told. I believe science, right, when it's science. And a lot of what the scientists say is science. But the science doesn't tell you what values you choose. The science doesn't tell you how much risk you should take. The science doesn't tell you what you should do. You, and this is true in everything, you as an individual have to take the best science you can find, make the best assessment you can make in terms of the validity of the scientific claims, and then you have to assess the extent to which those scientific claims affect your life, and include in assessing the effects on your life the effects that your actions might have on other people. That's something you have to take into account. And then you have to decide how to act, what to do, what's legitimate, what's illegitimate, what's rational, what's irrational, what's in your self-interest and what isn't in your self-interest. And this is the most important thing, and this is the most important point about why authoritarianism is so evil. Nobody can make those kind of value decisions for you. Only you can make them. Nobody has your hierarchy of values. Nobody is living your life. Only you can make decisions for yourself. The reason authoritarianism is so evil is that it denies you. Even if the authoritarian by accident makes the right decision for you, it's not the right decision because you didn't make it. So it's your responsibility to live your life based on your values, your decision making. Now that's not guaranteed for that you're going to make the right decision. But then you're the one who suffers the consequences. Or you should be held liable for the consequences you inflict on others if you misbehave. But it is truly it's truly unbelievable to me how many Americans, primarily Americans, but even Israelis, you'd expect better of Israel, were willing to just forgo their own values, were willing to just forgo their own mind, were willing to just accept the authority of the state over their life, over their mind, over their values, and let the state tell them how and what to behave, how and what to do. It's only when you pose a threat to other people, but the state has to be able to prove that you're a threat, can the state intervene. So if you test positive, and yet you insist on going around engaging with other people as if, without letting them know, as if you are no threat to them, then the state can take you and isolate you. But they have to be able to show that you test positive. They cannot, just on a probabilistic basis, isolate you, lock you down, put you in house arrest, particularly if you test negative, like in my case as entering Israel. I tested negative twice. They still wouldn't let me go free until I showed them I had a positive antibody test. That is, that I was truly either vaccinated or had COVID in the past. So, yeah, but what's truly mind-boggling and what's truly upsetting is just the fact that people just went along with it. So, to me, it's just more testament, together with a lot of other things that are going on in the world right now, that the Western mind today, the people living in the West, are ready for authoritarianism. They're ready for full-blown authoritarianism. And it just needs the right circumstances, the right kind of emergency, and mainly probably the right kind of charismatic leader to convince them that shut down their mind and just let the state run their lives. John says, you should use the super chat to ask questions, guys. That is the way to get my attention. But John does say, is following CDC recommendations folding to government? It depends. Why do you follow them? Are you following them because, yes, sir, you're the CDC, I know everything you say must be true, even though you designed a really, 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 failed test for COVID to begin with? You would not allow other people to design tests, and you basically caused this crisis in America. Why are you following the CDC? Are you following the CDC because you've thought about it, you've evaluated the recommendations, and they make sense to you? Or do you follow the CDC because they're the CDC, and they're authority in charge, and therefore you just do what you're told? So if you've decided, based on all the evidence that you have, and based on and specifically with regard to the recommendations they make, that the CDC indeed knows best, and therefore you're going to follow them, then fine, then it's rational, because you've made the choice and you've thought about it. But if you're doing it blindly, in a sense, because you've decided the CDC can't be wrong, or because the CDC is the authority for you, then it's absolutely a travesty. That's the authoritarian mind. Daniel says he likes the early show. Kevin asks, how big does the threat of infection have to be? Should flu be considered a threat? How big does it have to be for what? Oh, for the government to stop you from infecting other people. I've talked about this, and when should the government get involved in a pandemic? For example, the flu. People die from the flu. That's not obvious. There's no obvious answer to that, and there's not a clear answer to that. That is something that needs to be thought about and developed, and there need to be clear guidelines. I encourage everybody to read what Onkar Ghate wrote. It's a significant essay on the kind of legal regime that we should have that would take something like COVID into account. So there would have to be a law written, and it would be written in advance. It wouldn't be something you do during a pandemic. That would actually spell out in great detail when a government gets involved, under what conditions. It would define the kind of pandemic or the kind of crisis that would necessitate government involvement. And it could be a death rate similar to COVID. It could be a death rate in certain populations similar to COVID. It could be a death rate far above COVID. But it would be known in advance that these are the circumstances under which a government involved. It couldn't be the flu. So it can't be something that is just part of life. Like the flu is just part of life. You know, people die. It would have to be an unexpected or a sudden event that had a certain death rate, that posed a certain risk on the population, and then the government would get involved. But even then, the government wouldn't have the ability to shut you down. The government would have, the only role of the government in circumstances like this is to make sure that people who are infected, people who get a positive equivalent of the PCR test, are actually isolated so they don't pose a threat to other people. But when does that happen would be something that you would have to determine through legislature in advance, right? And there is no intrinsic number. Like if it's 10% death, then that's the government get, you know, and different countries could have different numbers, right? You could even imagine in a place like the United States, each state have a different threshold at which the government would get involved. It can't be zero, and it can't be only if, you know, everybody dies. It has to be some number that's reasonable. Would COVID have qualified? Maybe not. Probably, given how contagious it was and the threat to the hospital system that it potentially posed, and it did pose, right? So you would have to take a number of considerations into account. But obviously the flu is part of our culture. It's part of the world. We planned for it. We've got capacity for it. It's not going to destroy us, right? But maybe COVID, particularly early on, when we didn't know what it was, government had some role in it. Not the role it took, but some role. All right, clear gray sky. Good morning. Thank you for the support. Ali is desperate here, guys. $26 out of 400. So there's a long way to go. And let me just note that given that we probably got more than usual European listeners or early morning risers, the question now is, do you want to make Europeans and early morning risers look bad as compared to people who usually listen to the show? Here I'm using so a little bit of guilt here. Or no, I'm juicing up the competitive juices. Don't you want to be able to say that, you know, the early risers contribute as much to the Ron Book Show as others do? What do you say, Ali? Why is it so hard this morning? People don't like to spend money early in the morning. It's much easier to spend money later in the day. Maybe that's it. All right. I don't think the EU is a dictatorship, and it's certainly not a dictatorship on the scale of Stalin. So let's get. You have to have the right perspective, guys. You're not going to the gulag, even if you don't get vaccinated. Even if you talk up against vaccines, you're not going to the gulags. You're not being murdered in the streets. You're not being mowed down when you demonstrate. Right? To compare the current EU to Stalin is just, completely a loss of perspective. I mean, as bad as the EU is, and it's bad, and as bad as the Israeli government is, and as bad as the American government is, it's not Stalin. But the point is this, more importantly, is that if we don't stand up now, if we don't speak up now, if we don't object now, then one day we will have a Stalin. Now is the time to slow this down, or to stop it altogether, to reverse course. And the real question is, are there enough people in the West, are there enough people in the countries in which we live who will stand up to government now, before it's too late? It is incremental. It is incremental. But it doesn't help, and it doesn't add to our credibility if we talk about it as if Stalin is running the show. Because he's not. Luckily for us, he's not. I couldn't do the show. You can listen to the show if Stalin was in charge. So it panic, hysteria over, making things worse than they are, or pretending things are worse than they are, doesn't help our cause. It hurts our cause. It makes us look like crazy people. How can it be Stalin when everybody's at the mall and everybody's pretty well off and everybody's speaking their mind and people are demonstrating in the streets in Germany and in France, and nobody's being shot, not en masse? And it downplays, that's a good point, Red Colt, it downplays Stalin's evil. Stalin was so much more evil than the COVID police, right? I mean, I could have broken my home arrest, if you will, here in Israel. And what are they threatening me with? $2,000 fine. Now, I don't want to pay a $2,000 fine to the bastards, but that's what they're threatening with. They're not threatening me with a gulag. They're not going to put me up against the wall and shoot me. And that's what would have happened under Stalin. And if you want to see, what it looks like, look at North Korea. That's more like Stalin. Okay. So we're in the midst of a very, very, very sad episode in American and Western, if you will, and not just the West. Asia's panicking. Everybody is panicking. Everybody's panicked, and it's we should start a movement. Free Iran, let him fly. Thank you, Red Colt. Let him go. Let him fly, not for the sake of flying. Let him fly so he can go change the world. And Somna says, Canadian here. What should be the first steps objectivist Canadians like me should take to convince others to move away from the government system? We had so much healthcare rationing during COVID, and yet not a lot known. Well, I mean, the first thing you should be doing is educating people about what it means to have choice, about try to figure out why they're willing to give up their own sovereignty, why they're willing to give us their own values. Now, and the thing here is not to come across as a conspiracy theorist. Look, COVID is real. COVID is a real threat. People are dying from COVID. It's not like we want people to get COVID. Certainly not people who are susceptible to it, like old people, people with comorbidity. So we have to be the people of science. If objectivists are not the people of science, then what are we? Right? So we have to represent science, and science is on the side of COVID is real. But how bad is it? Now you get into statistics. And again, we should be the party of science. It's bad for these people under these conditions. This is where it's bad. This is where it's not. Here are the people who should, kids should be in school. That's science. So the way to educate them is educate them about the facts, educate them about reality. But fundamentally, it's to educate them about being egoistic, about choosing their own values, about living their own life for their own sake, and not accepting the authority of others, no matter who the others are, no matter how good or bad the cause is. It's your decision to make. It's your life. Again, unless you're an active threat to other people. But the burden of proof is on those who claim that you're an active threat. So, it's put it also this way. It's very tough to educate people during a crisis. It's very tough to educate people about COVID during COVID, because there's so much emotion tied to it. There's so much fear tied to it. So you have to overcome the fear, you have to overcome the emotion, reason with them, give them the big picture, the philosophy, the facts. It's hard to do in normal times. In crisis, it's even worse. In crisis, people revert to the emotion, and people revert to fear, and people revert to accepting authority. So wait until the crisis is over, try to learn the right lessons, and then try to educate your fellow Canadians about not succumbing to this next time, not being as susceptible to authoritarianism the next time. But that requires educating them in philosophy, and that's the mission that we're all engaged in. And it's so frigging hard. It is so hard. Nadav asks, and then, he paid with shekalim. So you can do super chat in Israeli currency. If I was infected with the virus, but through someone who doesn't know he has it, were my rights violated? If not, why is it the government's business? Your rights are violated when you're infected, when somebody knows that they have the virus. If they don't know, your rights are not violated. But part of what the government is supposed to do is isolate the people who they know have the virus. So I don't think you should have mandatory testing, but you should have easily available, massively available testing. And people have a self-interest to test. And if somebody tests positive and then chooses to go into the public, then they're violating your rights. If they don't know, but they didn't get tested and they don't want to get tested and they're ignoring testing and they're pretending that there's no problem, in a sense, they're violating your rights. The government can't do anything about it, but that's immoral. If they test negative, then the government has no business with them. But look, if you're in the middle of a pandemic and you choose not to get tested, you choose to be ignorant about your status, that's maybe not illegal in a rational society, but certainly is immoral. And there should be consequences, not political consequences, but moral, social consequences. Now, in a mixed economy like we live in today, at the very least, the government, if the government's going to do anything, the government is going to do something because we live in a mixed economy. What it should do is make testing accessible to everybody. And the technology was available. I talked about this last summer. The technology was available last May or June to provide cheap antigen tests, a rapid test that you can get a result within 5 minutes, and cheap, $5 a test. You could buy it, have it in your home. Every 2 days when you left your home, you would test yourself. If you're positive, you go. If you're negative, you stay home. And you make the decision. You don't have to report to anybody, just stay home. Because you have an incentive not to infect people. But that technology was never used, was never deployed. To this day, it has not been deployed. It has not been used. Even though it is the solution, right? Particularly once we're vaccinated. Antigen tests are not as accurate as PCR, but they tell you when the viral load is high. When the viral load is high, that's when you're infectious. Don't go outside. Don't interact with other people when you have a high viral load. And you can discover whether you have a high viral load with a very cheap, simple test that you can do at home. If we'd all had that, none of this would have happened. Again, that technology was available last summer, and the government stopped it from being distributed. Because the government doesn't trust you, doesn't trust me to make decisions for ourselves. All right. Looks like there's some disagreement on the chat, something about conspiracy theories. All right. Vaccines work, guys. The statistics are stunningly clear, right? Somebody's writing here about Wales. I don't know about Wales, but Israel has a huge number vaccinated. Yes, there's a growing number of cases of COVID. Mild. Hospitals are still pretty much empty. ICUs are still pretty much empty. And the people in ICUs are people who have not been jabbed. They're people who are unvaccinated. The people who are vaccinated are getting mild cases of COVID. This is true in the UK. This is true in Israel, where you've got large populations of vaccination. or at least in England, because I don't know what's going on in Wales. Somebody's claiming things are different in Wales. But that's just the reality. So right now, given that the side effects of getting the vaccines are minor, it just makes sense to get vaccinated and help get this over with. Okay, let's see. Any other super chat questions about COVID, about the authoritarianism of COVID and what is going on? Notice that what really scares me, and I've said this many times in the show, is that what politicians are learning from this is that in the name of emergency, in the name of saving lives, they can pretty much do anything to us and we will just fold. We will just accept anything. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention this. You see this book behind me? That's my book in Hebrew. It's this book. This book, Free Market Revolution, which hopefully all of you have, and if you haven't, you should go buy it. It's on Amazon. Free Market Revolution, Iron Man's Ideas Can End Big Government. Translated into Hebrew, available now on Amazon. So go buy it. Go get yourself a copy, all you Israelis. Show your support. It's right there. All right, Colin says, most people I've spoken to about this are pro-lockdown, pro-vaccine passports, and see no issue with the vaccines, although most would not vaccinate their young kids. I've come to believe neo-feudalism is our future. Yeah, I don't know what neo-feudalism is, but the future is unlikely to be like the past. I think some form of futuristic authoritarianism is much more likely. I have no issues with vaccines. I think vaccines are great. I think you should, particularly if you're over 40, you should probably get vaccinated. Certainly if you're over 50. I think if you're obese, you should get vaccinated. If you've got any comorbidities, you should get vaccinated. I think the only people who shouldn't get vaccinated are people, under 30. But now with the imposition of these stupid vaccine passports, the only reason I was not against vaccine passports originally is because I assumed they would only be used for international travel. But the idea of using vaccine passports to let you into restaurants is nutty and absurd and evil, because it is the state, again, mandating your behavior. If a certain restaurant wants only to accept guests who are vaccinated, that's within their right. I mean, a restaurant could also say, we only take unvaccinated people. And that's okay too. The restaurant should be able to discriminate based on their belief system, whatever they want, with their business model. But the idea that the government should dictate these things is just horrific. But I think vaccines make sense, because why get COVID if you can avoid getting COVID? And you can avoid getting COVID if you get vaccinated, or at least you can lower your probability of getting COVID dramatically if you get vaccinated. Plus, the fact is, the more of us get vaccinated, the sooner we get to normal life, the sooner we get herd immunity, the sooner we beat this thing and go on with living. And the side effects, again, I had 2 of the Modernas. 1 day of discomfort is basically the side effect after the second shot. All right, what else? It's the fact that people are pro-lockdowns is what shocks me. It just shocks me. The fact that people are okay with not sending their kids to school shocks me, even though all the data points to children not really getting the virus, getting it very mildly, and not really being conduits. Imagine what would have happened in the world if the virus killed children. Imagine the kind of panic and hysteria. I mean, this is a virus that kills primarily old people, which of all the people out there who are going to be killed seems to be the least scary. Like, old people are going to die anyway soon. Now, I know somebody's going to take this clip and take it out of context. But if you're going to have the least scary virus possible, it's a virus that kills old people. The most scary virus is a virus that kills young people. Imagine if the virus was killing young people. I mean, I can't even imagine how people would have behaved. The kind of panic and hysteria, and just they would have lost it completely. completely. By the way, a bunch of you are listening from the UK, so I'll just mention that next Saturday, I think it's Saturday the 3rd of August, I'll be doing an event in London. More information will be coming out in the next few days, but I'd love to see you all. Come and show that you don't care about COVID because you're vaccinated and you're all good, or if you're not vaccinated, I don't care. But come to the event. It'd be great if we had a lot of people. Maybe we can violate the UK's rules about assembly of bigger than I don't know what the rules are anymore. But the bigger the assembly, the more we'll be speaking out in this for freedom. So if you live in the UK, we'd love to see you next Saturday, the 3rd. I think we're doing like 3 different panels, and we're trying to get a bunch of big names to join me, and we're going to do some interesting things. So keep track of UK. What is it? Iron Center UK. If you live in Israel, we're doing an event next week in which we'll be handing out some not handing out. You'll be able to buy these copies of this book, and I'll sign them for you. But we'll launch the book here in Tel Aviv. So get a hold of Iron Center Israel and Boaz, and let him know if you want to come. Would love to see you guys. Hey, Libby, that includes you. Would love to see you. So hopefully I'll see you next. When is it? Next Wednesday. Next Tuesday. Because maybe on Wednesday I'm flying to the UK, but maybe not, because it's probably going to be on Friday if I fly to the UK at all. So the event on the 3rd of August might not happen because the UK government screws it all up. All right, let's talk about paleo, talk about science. Michael asks, Fauci seems frazzled and frightened by Rand Paul, like he got caught in a crime. I doubt it. He also seems like he's standing up to Rand Paul, which is nice to see somebody standing up to stupid politicians. I haven't been following very closely the interchange between Rand Paul and Fauci. I don't trust either of them. I find Rand Paul to have been betrayed his principles thoroughly by basically becoming a lackey of Donald Trump's and not speaking out against all the economic travesties that Donald Trump committed. I find him also to be too susceptible to the kind of conspiracy theory angle on COVID. And Fauci, while Fauci's probably a good scientist and obviously has done some important work in immunology, he's worked for the government for too long. I don't trust him in that respect. So I don't trust either of them. I really don't. And I don't find their exchanges. My guess is when you look at their exchanges, they're both wrong. And they both get outraged, and they're both wrong. Brian says, we'll get to paleo. People are still asking questions. However likely it is, states and Washington are creeping towards more mandates and lockdowns for this upcoming flu season. This includes masking people already vaccinated. What is an appropriate form of protest? I think the form of protest is, I think civil disobedience is appropriate. I think demonstrating against this is appropriate. I think showing up, if you're vaccinated, showing up unmasked to a demonstration, but getting large numbers of people, small demonstrations are useless. Don't bring weapons to a demonstration. You look like kooks if you do, unless you're willing to engage a revolution. I've said this before. You don't bring a weapon to a demonstration unless you're serious about an uprising against the government. And since I know you guys are not serious, don't bring a weapon. Demonstrate not the kooky stuff. Demonstrate against the government's power and the government's authority. Don't demonstrate against private businesses that don't want you to come in unmasked. Private businesses have a right to discriminate. They can put a sign up, vaccinated only. They can put a sign up, unvaccinated only. They can put a sign up, masks only. They can put a sign up, blue hair only. Theoretically, in America, you're not allowed to discriminate. But you've got to respect private property. You can't be a defender of liberty and not respect private property. So demonstrate against government, against government mandates, against government authoritarianism, and don't diss the science while you do it. Don't buy into the conspiracy theory nonsense and the unscientific BS that is so prevalent among the anti-mask, anti-vaccine crowd. Don't, for example, be anti-vaccine. There's no basis to be anti-vaccine. You might choose not to get vaccinated, for example, because you're young and healthy. That shouldn't make you anti-vaccine. It just says, I don't think I need the vaccine, and I'm willing to take the risk on myself. I'm willing to take the risk. Now, in a rational society, right, I'm curious what you guys would think. Imagine in a rational society, no government involvement in healthcare. Imagine if your insurance company told you, if you want to renew your policy, you have to get vaccinated. Or, if you're not going to get vaccinated, we're going to raise your insurance by 20%, 30%, 50%, 100%, 200%. Now that would be a legitimate way to incentivize you to get vaccinated. And you could switch insurance companies if there was an insurance company that would be willing to insure you if you're not vaccinated. But there would be a market, right? And different insurance companies would have to assess the risk, what it would cost if you went to hospital because you got COVID, what's your health status, are you old, are you young, are you obese, are you not? And based on that, they would determine the risk. And then you would basically negotiate with the insurance company, or you would view the market, and you would decide what insurance policy to take or get vaccinated. So the beauty of the whole thing is that the market would deal with all this stuff in a way that the government can't, because the market would create, somebody would sell an insurance policy to the unvaccinated. There'd be money to be made. It would just be more expensive. Somebody else would sell it to the vaccinated. There'd be competition for it. And the price would reflect, the price of the insurance, interestingly enough, would actually reflect the risk of you getting COVID, because that's how markets work, right? Prices reflect all the available information about the particular problem. And we'd actually know more about COVID, more about the risk of COVID, if we had a private insurance market that was allowed to price risk properly. So one of the amazing things, one of the things that is so frustrating, is that a truly free market, it's really hard to imagine how good things would be, how much information we'd have, how much knowledge would be accessible, and how our decisions would be based much more on facts and evidence, much more based on reason than they are today. Because today, we're filled. What the government does by centralizing power, by centralizing information, is maximizing uncertainty. They create risk. They create uncertainty. The exact opposite of what people think. Markets are so good at resolving uncertainty, at reducing uncertainty, at hedging risk, in all kinds of creative, interesting ways. Colin says, expert class telling us what to do, some moral choices. Small businesses are near extinction. People losing their jobs and many others stuck into status of a property-less serfs. Joe Kotkin wrote a book, Neo-Feudalism. I haven't seen the book Neo-Feudalism, but I really do doubt that we're going to enter a feudalistic society. I also, even though you put experts in quotes, I just don't like using that term in a sense that it's good that we have experts. It's good to have experts. Experts are not a bad thing. It's sad that we now fear experts. It's sad that we fear elites. Elites in the sense of people who know, who specialize, who are experts. It's not a bad thing, but a good thing. I also think it's important to keep things in perspective. Now, I don't know what's going on in the UK as much as I do in the US, but a lot of small businesses were driven out of business in the United States. But what's interesting, what I find really interesting, is small business creation. The number of startups, the number of businesses created over the last year and a half in the United States is at record level. So what's happened is that while businesses are being destroyed, other businesses are being created. So while I share the temptation of being super pessimistic about the world, about everything going to go to hell tomorrow, about the economy is going to go to hell, we're going to have hyperinflation, the dollar is going to collapse, buy gold. I mean, that's very tempting to believe, and it's very tempting to get engaged with that. Oh, tomorrow's going to be authoritarian, we're going to neo-feudalism, it's right around the corner, it's right imminent, right there. As bad as I think things are not that bad. And I know that there's a sense in which that's a contradiction, but it really is. Small business creation in America is at record levels. That's just fact, just data. I invest in banks in the United States. Banks right now are super healthy. They haven't written down a lot of loans. They've worked with customers. They've renegotiated stuff. So that tells me that there are not that many businesses that are completely shut down, because if they had been massive bankruptcies, then banks would have felt the pain, right? They would be writing off loans, huge numbers of loans. So as human beings, we're tempted to see anecdotes and extrapolate from anecdotes, to induce from one example, or to induce from 3 examples when there are actually millions of them. The data doesn't suggest that in the short run, things are as bad as they seem. I think things are really, really bad in the long run, but things are not as bad in the short run. They're just not. And part of it is because government has gotten very, very good, very, very good at mitigating short-term economic damage by sacrificing the long term. So if what normally happens, if you will, if what normally is not the right term, but what you'd expect to happen is you'd get a sharp decline in economic activity because of COVID, a sharp decline because of the financial crisis, and then slowly get out of it, and then maybe return to normalcy as the right policies are engaged in. What actually happens is you never get the sharp decline because the government won't allow it. So the government eliminates the sharp decline. But what it eliminates when it eliminates the sharp decline is also the recovery. And what you get is stagnation. What you get is slow economic growth. What you get is extended pain, or extended mild pain, rather than severe pain with dramatic recovery. Government has become very, very good at dissipating the sacrifice and dissipating the cost over many people, over many years, so that none of us feel it. And indeed, most of the pain is never felt directly, because most of the pain is in the lost opportunities. And that's brilliant of government and authoritarians and generally collectivists and statists. Because if we suffered the pain immediately, we'd rebel. We'd go out into the streets and rebel. But what they do is, for example, what did they do in COVID? They locked us up at home. We couldn't work. We couldn't make a living. They mailed us a check. They sent us money so that we could feed ourselves. So, and the money they mailed us is almost the same amount of money we would have earned. So we don't feel that worse off, right? In order to give us this money, they took on debt, right? And the impact of all this is that production is down, but we've all got money, so we're buying stuff. So production is not down a lot in the short run. And what we've sacrificed is the long run. That is the long run where we have to pay the debt back, the long run where we might have higher inflation than we otherwise would have, the long run where we didn't invest into the capital that we would have if the COVID response had been differently, the long run in the sense that we suppressed innovation because of government policies. All the things we don't have, we'll never know we didn't have. So we don't feel it. So we come out of COVID feeling just as rich as we went into COVID, even though we're poorer. We're poorer in a sense, not of we literally have less money today than we did 18 months ago. We're poorer in terms of the opportunities we face into the future. But how do you measure that? How do you even describe that to people? How do you explain that? That's so hard. It's much easier for the statists to say, look, the government intervened, we saved all of you, we didn't have a bad crisis after all, all of you have jobs, you all have money in the bank account, look, life's good, don't worry, things are great. And statism works because even though we had a COVID crisis, everything's fine. The story we tell is, oh, but if the government hadn't done this, we could be 10 times richer in 20 years. And people go, yeah, that's hypothetical. The fact is I'm not begging in the streets, which is what people like you would have expected. That the economy would have crashed, everything would have been devastated. Our case on an existential basis is very hard to make because people are not feeling the pain of their decisions. The pain they're feeling is, again, in the lost opportunities, which does not have a reality for them. They don't know what they don't know. They don't know what they're missing out on. And it's hard to explain it to them. It's hard to convince them of it. All right, Prague Tiki asks, the names you guys come up with. Oh, Prague Tiki. Okay, it's the Tiki bar in Prague, right? He's the owner of the Tiki bar in Prague. That's why he calls himself Prague Tiki. I asked before, but I need more depth as I work on my unique piece of fiction. If I burn an Amex check or a bearer bond, it benefits the issuer. How does this differ from burning a Fed Reserve note? How does this differ? So if you burn a bond, then the benefit is that the person who issued that bond will never have to pay you back. You'll never collect on the bond. If you burn a Federal Reserve note, nothing happens because there's nothing for you to collect, right? A Federal Reserve note is not a claim on somebody's assets. It's not a claim on anything. All a Federal Reserve note is a fiction. It's in a sense. It's a fiat money. It's a by law a means by which you can settle debt, by a means by which by law you can pay your taxes. Right? So by burning the note, the only person who loses really is you. There's a sense in which other people benefit because by burning the note, you have reduced the amount of fiat money in circulation, and therefore the value of what remains has gone up in terms of purchasing power. So he says, but if it was private bank backed by gold, it would benefit the private bank. Yes, if it was a private bank backed by anything, that private bank would benefit because they would have the gold and you would not be able to claim it. You would have no claim on that gold anymore. It would be gone. It would be like you lost it, right? You burnt it. Well, if you lost it, somebody else might have found it. So there still might be a claim on it. But if you literally burn it and destroy the claim, then they lose, yes. But with fiat money, the Federal Reserve note, the money you have, the cash you have in your hand, is not a claim on anything. It's just a means by which to exchange. It's a tool of exchange. A tool of exchange declared so by fiat, by a decision of the government. Nothing more than that. Nothing in reality. All right. Hopefully that helps with the writing of your novel. All right. And I'll see you in Prague whenever they allow me in. Although I think Prague is open to Americans. So maybe in the fall. Maybe in the fall. All right. Paleo. I want to talk about paleo. So this is a question from one of the guys in the audience here. So he has taken on this view that Paleolithic man basically had it right in terms of, because basically it evolved in a particular way, right? So we evolved in a particular environment, and so from a biological perspective, we evolved to eat the food that was available to us at that time. We evolved as hunter-gatherers, so that would suggest that the food we evolved to eat is meat, berries, and nuts, something like that. Maybe some fruit, and maybe a little bit of grass or some kind of vegetable. But basically, that's it. Our feet evolved to walk barefoot. They didn't evolve to have heels for women or any kind of like sole in a shoe. Should be just flat, because that's how we evolved, right? What else? We evolved not to wear clothes. So you shouldn't wear clothes because you're not getting enough vitamin D, because we evolved to be basically pretty much naked, so we can absorb as much vitamin D as we can. But he is wearing a shirt, so he obviously doesn't take his paleo too seriously. And he's sitting in an office away from the sun, which is not good. What else? It's food, shoes. Yeah, I mean, we evolved to only wear animal skins, right? So cotton should be out. You shouldn't wear any cotton. And certainly not vaccinate yourself or get any medicines, because we certainly didn't evolve to that. Okay, so I'm making a caricature out of this because he doesn't actually believe all that, but I'm trying to extrapolate, right? So look, this is my view of paleo, because I read some stuff on paleo, and I eat a moderate form of a paleo diet. Not really, but because I got into this diet before I knew what paleo was. So I arrived at the conclusion I should eat this diet before I knew what paleo was, based on scientific evidence, not based on paleo, which I don't think is based on science. To the extent that there's something to be learned from paleo man, we should learn it. But the idea that evolution evolves us to be optimal is just unscientific. You evolved to survive, not to thrive, not to flourish, not to live to be 100, not to be optimal. Evolution is not about optimization. Evolution is about your ability to reproduce at minimal cost. That's it. So at minimal amount of energy, how much can you reproduce? And if that means you only live to be 49, that's fine. Like women, after they, once they reach menopause, are useless for evolution. And I know they tell just so stories about being grandmothers and the importance of that, but that's bullshit, right? Evolution doesn't work that way. So women are useless after 49, according to paleo. So, men should just have multiple wives, or, serial young wives. And the younger the better, because then you can have more kids. And all you should do is reproduce. So you're wasting your seed by not constantly reproducing from an evolutionary perspective. And it's probably unhealthy. You should probably have more sex and probably have more kids, because that's. I just don't buy the whole thing. We again, it goes back to this idea that evolution is not about optimization. It's not an optimization mechanism. It's optimizing around what you don't want to optimize. It's not optimizing about your flourishing. It's not optimizing about you as an individual's life, extending your life. It's optimizing around your ability to reproduce at the lowest cost from a biological perspective possible. I don't want to optimize around that. I'm not interested. I had 2 kids, not having any more. I've got a wife who's over 40, maybe I shouldn't say, but over 40, and I have no intention of marrying a younger woman, or not marrying a younger woman, just having kids with a younger woman. No interest in any of that, right? So I don't want to be an animal, right? I've divorced myself from being that kind of animal. We have free will, which means we are free to optimize. And there's no reason we cannot use science to optimize, to make ourselves better. Now, shoes is a good example, right? you evolved barefoot, which means you didn't walk flat. You walked on rocks and stones and the ground, on sand, on many, many pretty bad surfaces. You didn't walk on concrete, on tile, on carpet. So why should you apply that, which you don't have anymore, gravel and sand and dirt and all that, to the modern world where you work on carpets and on concrete? So the question is not what did Paleo man do? The question is what is best given our biological structure to wear when walking on concrete or on whatever it is that we walk on. And I don't know, I like those Nike shoes that weigh almost nothing, that are shaped to fit your foot perfectly, that give you no, impact to hurt your back, because when you wear completely flat, thin shoes, every time you hit that pavement, your back is going, which is not true of Paleo man, because he walked differently, he walked on different surfaces, everything was different. They say you should eat meat, right? Only eat meat today. You shouldn't eat anything else. But the meat today is completely different than it was that Paleo man ate. The animals were different. We basically, no cow today is genetically the same as a cow from 15,000 years ago. Almost no animal, unless you literally go hunting in the wild. And what's wild anymore? Most of the wild is being cultivated by human beings, so most of the wild is controlled. But all the cows are different. So you say, okay, but it should be grass-fed. It doesn't matter. The cow is different. The genetic makeup of the cow is different. We've basically genetically engineered cows to be different than what used to be, right? So you can't recreate Paleo anything. So the question is not what did Paleo man do? The question is what's best for you. Now, I happen to believe that, and this is a very weak belief because I don't think there's enough science to justify this or anything else. I think diet is something we know very little about. I happen to think that, meat is not the enemy. Meat is probably your friend. Eating fat is probably good for you, not bad for you. That the damaged health is probably done more by sugar and by simple carbs than anything else. But I don't claim this as scientific knowledge, and that's why I don't advocate for it, because I don't know. I eat that way. I try to minimize my sugar intake. I try to minimize simple carbs because I feel better when I eat that way, and because I've been doing it for a long time and it seems to work, and I keep the weight off and I'm basically healthy. So that's why I do it. And it seems like there's some scientific evidence to suggest it, but it's not hugely strong, right? It's not massively strong. The Mediterranean diet seems to do very, very well in studies, and Mediterranean diet is not a fat-centric diet. It's much more a vegetable-centric diet. So you've got to follow the science. And that's true in all aspects of life. But the idea that Paleo, that Paleo got it right and we've been spoiling it since then is just simply wrong. It's strong evidence that Paleo man had real bad cases of arthritis, that all that walking on rocks was probably not good for their knees and not good for and all that lifting and moving stuff around was not good for their elbows, and that their life was not as happy and wonderful and successful. And then there's the whole issue that Mark raises here about the spiritual side of life, right? They didn't have Beethoven. So I'm willing to give up a few years of life in order to have Beethoven and Michelangelo and Hugo and have that spiritual side of life that they didn't, right? Because it was still pretty primitive. So I really, so I think that you have to step away from these ideas that, again, this idea that evolution is optimal. It's not. This idea that nature cannot be improved upon, which is an idea that exists out there. Why can't nature be improved upon? In what respect can't nature be improved upon? If I could take a drug to make me live an extra 100 years, of course I would take it. We're taking the vaccine, right? If somebody tells me I need, if I think I need more vitamins, then I'll take the vitamins, even though I'm not getting them naturally. I don't want to recreate Paleolithic life. I think it's horrible. I mean, I couldn't Zoom. I couldn't talk to you guys. I couldn't do all the things I do on my computer. I love modern life, but why would we think that our clothes, our food, everything around us wouldn't change given that our environment has changed? We changed our environment. So when we changed our environment, wouldn't we also have to change the way we eat, the way we sleep, all of that to accommodate the fact that we've changed our environment? I think it negates the whole idea. I mean, a lot of the paleo stuff negates the whole idea of free will, of this idea that we can change our environment. We don't just have to give into our environment, and so we can change our environment, and therefore we can change. For example, we build concrete, we build streets, so now we can wear Nikes. Right? So once we change our environment, we have to change how we as a biological entity interact with that environment. Because if we treat concrete as a tree, that's not going to work well, right? That's a contradiction. So I just don't, I guess my conclusion is I don't buy it. Shazbot asks, I gather that grass-fed beef is a bit better because cows are better able to digest grass. Healthier animals equals better meat. Is there any truth to this? I think so. I think there's truth to it. Do I know so? No. So the idea is that because cows evolved to eat grass, they're healthier. The composition of the fat that cows have is healthier. I think there's more omega-3 in the fat of cows when they're grass-fed than there is when they're grain-fed. When they're grain-fed, they tend to have more omega-6s. Does that mean we should only eat grass-fed beef? Does it mean we can eat non-grass-fed beef but also supplement with omega-3? I don't know, and the problem is that not enough science is devoted to figuring these things out. Because there's too much, I don't know, what is it, mythology, and there's too much religion associated with diet, right? The religion of various diets, right? And you have to just look at it all from the perspective of fact and science. What actually is going on? And the problem with nutrition is we still have a very primitive knowledge of how our bodies work. As amazing as that sounds, if you know anything about medicine, they still don't know how our body actually works, how things interact. They know very little about cell biology, how cell biology is impacted by diet, how different nutrients affect things. We're still, I don't know, decades away from having a good understanding of physiology, just the basic physiology, like the whole idea of all this bacteria in the gut, and the bacteria in the gut actually having an impact on hormones and having an impact on all kinds of metabolic systems in the body is new. It's just in the last few years, and yet it's a major discovery and has major implications, and we don't understand them yet. That's just one example, but there's tons of stuff we don't know, which makes me just think, how ridiculous things like evolutionary psychology are. We know so little about the easy stuff, i.e. our body. We know even less about our brain and how it works, and the structure of it and how it deals with different things. We know a lot less about that than we know about the body. So, yet people make very strong claims about both the body and the mind. So beware about biological claims, strong biological claims about things we don't know enough about yet. There goes my light again. So I'm suspicious. You need to make strong claims, you need strong evidence, and there's just, biology's hard. Biology's hard because it's complex systems that interact with one another. They have what do you call it? Properties that the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That is, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. They have properties that are unique to the whole, right? Consciousness, for example, free will, that you can't pinpoint as just the sum of the parts. So there's a lot of complexity here, and there's a lot to think about. Okay, James asked, do you think that meat will continue to rise in price? What do you think made people want to start the grass-fed boom? Do you eat pork belly? I love pork belly. Hard to get in Israel, but no, you can get it in Israel. But pork belly is delicious. It's like, why would you want to live and not eat pork belly? That's the question. Belly generally is pretty tasty because it's fatty. Fat is where the taste comes from. So yes, I do eat pork belly. I love pork belly, and I eat it in many different forms. What do you think made people want to start the grass-fed boom? I don't know. I don't know if it must have started. It started before Paleo, but I think it's the Paleo movement and the anti-carb movement that really, the going back to nature, the organic movement, all of that kind of spurred the grass-fed stuff. Do you think the meat will continue to rise in price? No, because as it rises in prices, as long as we're still allowed to grow meat, that is to own cows, supply will increase, and that will drive costs down. So right now demand is driving prices up because there's a shortage, but ultimately, as long as ranchers are free to get more cows, they'll have more cows, and prices will come down in the future. Unless the price of meat is going up as part of a general rise in inflation, and if that's the case, then yes, it will continue, but not separate from just a general rise in inflation. Now, if you have environmental rules that would cause the supply of meat to shrink because they're not allowed to buy more beef, they're not allowed to buy more cows, or the shrinkage of the herds for environmental reasons, then it will persist. But I haven't seen that yet. I haven't seen that happening yet, not in the United States anyway. James says, based on science, raw cheese milk has been proven to be good. Has it? Are you sure, James? Maybe there's evidence to suggest that it's good. I'm not going to, but proven to be good? I'm not drinking raw milk. I, for example, am allergic to milk, so it's not good for me. But, I'm not sure it's proven, all I'm saying. My guess is you're picking and choosing your science. So be careful. Make sure you're being objective. I'm not saying you're not, but I'm suspicious of strong claims about diet. I'm just suspicious. So make sure you're getting your science right and you're not picking and choosing, right? Why does FDA ban raw milk and raw cheese? Because they are looking at a different science than you do. Raw milk and raw cheese are more susceptible to bacteria, are more likely to cause certain diseases, are more likely to cause people to be sick. And it might be healthier, but at what cost? So let's say it turns out the raw milk, when drank, will extend your life on average by 2 years, let's say. I'm being very generous here. I don't think anything extends your life by 2 years, but 2 years, right? But 1 in 1,000 has a bacteria that will kill you. So you're guaranteed 2 extra years. Well, you're not guaranteed. There's a high probability you'll get 20 years, but 0.1% you're going to die when you drink it. Now, I'm not saying any of that is science. I'm just giving you a scenario, right? Do you want to drink raw milk? Now, I think it should be your choice as to what you're going to do. I don't think the FDA should ban it. But I wouldn't drink the raw milk in that case. 0.1% of dying tomorrow is a very high rate. And I don't need raw milk. I don't need any milk. Right? You don't have to drink any milk. What do you think of small farms versus mass produced? I love mass production. I'm a massive fan of mass production. I mean, there's something, cool about small farms if they produce. The only reason small farms exist is if they can produce superior product. So great, I love the choice. You can either choose mass produce, which means cheap food, which means more people, which means more geniuses to create the technology that I love. And if you're rich enough, you can afford to buy stuff that's small grass and other stuff like that, right? So both would exist in a free market, and you'll pick and choose. Raw milk cheese has more good bacteria and fat. Yes, it does, probably. But it also has some bad bacteria once in a while. It's more susceptible to bad bacteria. The reason it has the good bacteria is the same reason it can have bad bacteria. It's a bacteria-rich environment. And the question is, to what extent are you willing to take the risk of ingesting the bad bacteria? I'd like, so this is where we still need science to give us the proper probabilities so we can properly, as individuals, assess the risk. But this is where one needs to be objective about these things. Edward asks, are you planning to come to Romania anytime soon? I go where I'm invited. So if you'd like me to come to Romania and you think an event in Romania could be organized that would have a decent sized audience, let's say 100 people or more, then write me or the Ayn Rand Institute an email and I will happily come to Romania in the fall. So sometime in the fall, I'm planning to do a East and South European tour where I could come to Romania. James asks, were you able to view the movie about tax haven, The Spider's Web, about the UK? Not yet, but it's on my list, so I will get to it. It's on my list to view. So I apologize it's taken so long, but I will be getting to it. All right, guys, you have gravely disappointed Ali, and you have given a bad rap to Europeans more generally, because we've only raised $174 rather than the minimal that Ali desires, which is $400. So Ali's crushed. Yes, there she is, crying on the chat. But anyway, thank you for those of you who did contribute. Thank you for participating. Thank you for supporting the show. And thank you for those Americans who are on there very early in the morning. I appreciate that. Thanks for my Israeli friends for asking a couple of good questions that got us going. I have time for another super chat if you're willing to put the money in, so do it quickly while I'm wrapping up. I don't know when the next show is going to be because it kind of depends on the quality of the internet in my various locations. Here we have spectacular internet, so it's very good. So I'll probably do a show. Yeah, anyway, I should check with Boz before I guarantee anything. But probably early next week, I'll come back. I'll do a show from the same office I'm doing one today. Somebody asked if I watch the Olympics. I love watching the Olympics, but this year it's just I haven't been able to. I wouldn't. I wouldn't. Oh, geez. I wouldn't have donated anything if I weren't homesick. I don't understand the comment. So you're donating because you're homesick. All right. Homesick for where? Homesick for Israel? Why would you be homesick for Israel? That's not fair. I know a lot of people are homesick for Israel. I'm different in that I've never been homesick to Israel. Oh, he's sick at home. All right. He's not homesick. He's homesick. This is why... all right, you didn't do homesick as one word. All right, grammar is important. He's sick at home. Well, thank you for spending time with us while you're sick at home. What do you have? I thought sickness was driven out of the world by COVID. I thought nobody was sick anymore, unless it was COVID. All right, Scott is listening from work. I'm glad I'm not your employer. All right, guys. Dean was going to ask a question, but he's too slow. He's got a cold. How did you get a cold? It's summer, and it's COVID, and the world is filled with COVID. What do you think about Avraham Burg? Avraham Burg. Did you read his books? I don't know Avraham Burg. I'm sorry. His name sounds familiar, but I don't know who he is. So I'm not engaged with the Israeli world as much as I would be if I lived in Israel. It's hard to keep track of multiple political systems and multiple intellectual worlds all at the same time. All right, guys, have a great, what day is it today? Wednesday? Have a great rest of your week. I'll probably see you over the weekend sometime. I'll probably be back in the next few days. Thanks for the support. Of course, the proper, if you're not subscribed, subscribe. Click that subscribe button. Don't forget to like the show before you leave. Those of you watching on Facebook and on YouTube, I think. No, on Twitter, please subscribe on YouTube. And finally, you can support the show on YourOwnBookShow.com/support, on Patreon, on Subscribestar, on Locals. I had a really nice conversation with Dave Rubin, the guy who started Locals, in South Dakota at a rooftop bar. When was this? Like 5 days ago, like recently. So Dave Rubin sends his regards to all of you. Bye, everybody. I will talk to you soon. I'm not going to tell you about my discussion.